Right, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Another one of our Safer at Home series talks. Thank you for being with us. Another sultry summer night here on the Cape and in Plymouth. So a couple things before we get started. As you know, all our talks are brought to us by Cape Cod 5, First Citizens Federal Credit Union, and Martha's Vineyard Savings. All the books on our Safer at Home series are available at Eight Cousins Bookseller in Falmouth. So we hope that you go and visit the local establishment there. Michael Blanding, I hadn't realized it's been 6 years since he had come to visit to Falmouth, but if the name seems familiar, it's because he has been there back before COVID ever entered our lexicon. He wrote a book called The Map Thief, and he came and talked about that. He's a Boston-based investigative journalist, and it's actually going to be a little bit different tonight because he's got a co-host tonight and somebody who's involved very heavily with this book, Dennis McCarthy, who's basically the scholar and as Michael can explain, kind of the source material for a lot of the book. So tonight's going to be a little twofer for us. So would you welcome both Michael Blanding and Dennis McCarthy?
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mark. It's too bad that I can't be on the Cape tonight, but at least I can be the next best thing, which is virtually. So I am just going to read a little bit from my book to start, and I'm just going to start right with the introduction. So there's not anything that you need to know going in, and I'm just going to read a short excerpt to sort of set the scene. And then, as Mark said, I'm going to introduce Dennis, who is the scholar in the title of my book, North by Shakespeare, a rogue scholar's quest for the truth behind the bard's work. And Dennis and I will have a conversation for a little while, and then we will open it up to a Q&A towards the end and answer any burning questions that you all may have. Prologue. It was the greatest party of Elizabeth's reign, 19 days of gut-busting feasts, minstrel performances, bear baiting, Italian acrobats, and jaw-dropping fireworks. All of it was designed for a single purpose, to woo a queen. When Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, planned the festivities at his estate of Kenilworth Castle in July 1575, he was getting desperate. After 15 years of vying for Queen Elizabeth's hand, he was no closer to the promise of marriage than when he'd begun. The Kenilworth Festival was his last-ditch attempt at winning the Queen's affections, and Leicester spared no expense to impress her. As the party raged, nobles and gentry from across the realm, as well as commoners from the countryside, guzzled 40 barrels of beer and 16 barrels of wine a day as they pursued wanton encounters in the surrounding woods and fields. Leicester kept his eyes on the Queen, anxiously watching for signs that she was enjoying the elaborate masks and other entertainments he had dreamed up in her honor. On several nights, Leicester unleashed fireworks displays created by an Italian pyrotechnician over a man-made lake that lapped against the western wall of the castle. The spectacles lasted for hours, including dazzling dragons, fighting dogs and cats, and rockets that seemed to shoot out of the water itself. A contemporary observer described them as a blaze of burning darts flying to and fro, gleams of stars coruscant, streams and hail of fiery sparks of such intensity that the heavens thundered, the waters surged, the earth shook. Another night, the Earl staged a giant water pageant as Elizabeth was making her way across a long bridge over the lake. An actor dressed as the sea god Triton rode across the water to her on a mechanical mermaid. Sounding a trumpet in the shape of a whelp, he commanded the seas to still, shouting, "You waters wild, suppress your waves and keep you calm and plain." After his speech, another actor dressed as the fabled Greek musician Arion serenaded her from atop a 24-foot-long mechanical dolphin. Music emanated eerily from the dolphin's belly, where an ensemble of musicians had been secreted inside. There's no record of how the Queen received the performance, whether she stood stony-faced or smiled and clapped with joy, or felt a rise of love in her heart for the man who had gone to such extravagant lengths to please her. But the moment has been immortalized after a fashion. beloved play, A Midsummer Night's Dream. In one scene, Oberon, king of the fairies, reminisces to his underling Puck while in a jealous fit over the fairy queen Titania. Thou rememberest, since once I sat upon a promontory and heard a mermaid on a dolphin's back, uttering such dulcet and harmonious breath that the rude sea grew civil at her song, and certain stars shot madly from their spheres to hear the sea maid's music, he says to Puck. That very time I saw, but thou couldst not, flying between the cold moon and the earth, Cupid all armed. A certain aim he took at a fair vestal throned by the west, and loosed his love shaft smartly from his bow as it should pierce 100,000 hearts. For more than a century, those lines have been read as an allusion to Leicester, who shot a love arrow at his own vestal, England's famous Virgin Queen Elizabeth, at her pageant complete with dolphin, mermaid, and fireworks. It is less clear how Shakespeare, then a boy 11 years old, could have witnessed the spectacle, or why he would have included it in a play written about 1595, some 20 years after the event. In his book, Will and the World, Harvard professor Stephen Greenblatt allows that it is certainly conceivable that Shakespeare's father may have taken him from their home in Stratford-upon-Avon, 14 miles away, to see the display. If so, then perhaps Shakespeare stood with his father upon a promontory overlooking the lake to catch a glimpse of the entertainments. And perhaps the sight made such an impression on him that he remembered it for the next 2 decades. And perhaps he found a moment to work it into a play performed before the queen to remind her of her youthful wooing by her favorite courtier. Those are a lot of perhapses. It's not the only explanation, however, for how the Kenilworth water pageant could have inspired Shakespeare's comedy. The playwright could have heard a report from someone who attended or read about it in a letter circulated after the event. Or there was another possibility. Perhaps another person wrote those lines, someone who attended the event as a guest and witnessed the pageant firsthand. I first heard the name Thomas North on October 2015. I had been invited to Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania to give a lecture about a book I'd written about a thief of rare maps. The weather was unseasonably warm and the foliage was in full array with a spectacular red maple lining up the picture window of the library lecture hall. Afterwards, the lecture sponsors, English professor emerita June Schluter and her husband Paul, a literature scholar, took me to a dinner reception. Over a pasta buffet, they introduced me to a scholar named Dennis McCarthy, a confident 53-year-old who looked a decade younger than his age. McCarthy had attended my lecture with his adult daughter, Nicole Golovsky, and only later did I learn that the two positioned themselves around the last remaining seats so that I could sit next to one of them. McCarthy immediately pulled me into conversation, asking me about my book and telling me about his own research. And before long, we were spiritedly discussing maps and geography. As the reception wound down, he invited me to continue talking over drinks with his daughter and her fiance. I was alone on a Thursday night in a small college town, and the thought of going back to my B&B was infinitely less appealing. I figured I could have a few drinks and continue an enjoyable conversation. I had no idea how this chance meeting would start me down a path to trace a literary mystery that I'd follow along with McCarthy for the next 5 years. We headed to the College Hill Tavern, a bar with old sports memorabilia framed on the walls, go Leopards, and students and locals drinking liquor from plastic cups. We sat at a chipped wooden high top, straining to hear each other over the impromptu karaoke of nearby patrons. I don't know whose idea it was to order martinis, but I was a bit foggy by the time McCarthy finally leaned across the table and told me he had a story for me. You know how Shakespeare used other sources to write his plays? McCarthy asked over the din of amateur Bon Jovi. Sure, I replied, trying to remember anything about Shakespeare's sources for my first year college class. Well, I found a source no one ever knew about before, he said. This unknown manuscript, he continued, was a treatise by a 16th century courtier named George North. This work, he claimed, influenced some of Shakespeare's greatest plays, including Richard III, Macbeth, and King Lear. But Shakespeare never even read the manuscript, McCarthy continued, as I struggled to follow his argument through a haze of classic rock and booze. Instead, George's relative, Sir Thomas North, had used it to write his own plays. Oh, he is one of those, I thought to myself, a conspiracy theorist who thought Shakespeare didn't write Shakespeare. But McCarthy hurriedly added in the fact that he believed the Bard of Avon wrote every play attributed to him during his lifetime. He also believed, however, that Shakespeare had used these earlier plays by Thomas North for his ideas, his language, and even some of his most famous soliloquies. There was something about a murder involving North's sister and an affair Queen Elizabeth may or may not have had with North's patron, the Earl of Leicester, and a tale of familial exile uncannily like Prospero's story in The Tempest. I didn't believe any of it. Where are North's plays now? I asked. Lost, McCarthy said, but so were most manuscripts written in the Elizabethan era. Why hadn't anyone discovered this before? Because no one had the right tools to do so, he said, arguing excitedly that his computer-assisted techniques had the potential to finally solve the mystery of how and why Shakespeare's plays were written. I vaguely knew about the conspiracy theories that Shakespeare was a fraud and the plays were really written by the Earl of Oxford or someone else, but this was something different. McCarthy's theory was more akin to saying Shakespeare plagiarized or collaborated with another writer. The theory seemed outlandish, but I liked McCarthy and was somewhat amused by the lengths to which he'd gone to pitch me. I promised to look at whatever he sent me. So that's how I start my book, North by Shakespeare. And as I say, that was sort of what started me down this path that was really would take me for 5 years to look at McCarthy's work and eventually start traveling all over Europe with Dennis as we sought to sort of unravel together this mystery of my book, North by Shakespeare. And I did eventually write about that manuscript that Dennis had found, the one that was written by Thomas's cousin, George North. And it was an article that appeared on the front page of the New York Times in 2018. And it was very well received by scholars that were really over the moon about the fact that a new source for Shakespeare had been discovered, and they really bought into this idea that this manuscript had been used to write many of Shakespeare's plays, including King Lear and Richard III and Macbeth. But there was a much larger part to Dennis's story, as I explained in the introduction, that involved not George North, but his cousin Thomas North, taking that manuscript along with a number of other sources and writing these source plays from which Dennis believes Shakespeare adapted his work. And it's a much more controversial theory. It's a much more complicated theory. And it's eventually this that I ended up turning into my book, in which I describe my own engagement with Dennis and our travels together and my attempt to try and see whether there might actually be something to this theory after all. And so with that as an introduction, I'm going to introduce Dennis, and we will talk a little bit about the book, but more importantly about his theories and about sort of what led him onto this, and see if he can convince and entice all of you into also perhaps buying into his claims. So without any further ado, Dennis McCarthy, the scholar that I profile in my book. And Dennis, for starters, just tell me kind of you've all heard my side of the story of our meeting together, but tell me a little bit about kind of what was on your mind in 2015 as you approached me after that talk and started this conversation with me, which would eventually lead us on this path together.
Well, first I was looking for a good drinking friend, and that
you found.
And yes, that was a home run there. But we also knew that you were a great investigative reporter, we being Nicole and my daughter, Nicole, and me. And I believe June Schluter, who was the one you were reading for the Schluter lecture, is the one that kind of was setting this up. But when we had the chance to sit with you, we were thinking the best we could do, pitch him at some point, and maybe he will some time in the future write an article. That's the best we were hoping for. And
little did you know how far things would go.
Yeah, so that was wonderful.
Well, I imagine that at this point there are a number of people listening who are skeptical, as I was when you first approached me, and who may sort of be vaguely aware of these theories, but really have believed that Shakespeare wrote the plays attributed to him. So why there has been such a question or a mystery about Shakespeare's plays, and why this belief has persisted that perhaps Shakespeare didn't write them, at least didn't write them in the way we think he did.
Sure. Well, as has been known and has been stated numerous times by all sorts of scholars and is agreed upon by scholars today, there's all these early versions of Shakespeare plays that he simply couldn't have written. They're just too, they're referred to and discussed in whether it's Revel's accounts or satires of the time. Long before Shakespeare was old enough to write them, there's a reference to a Romeo and Juliet on the English stage in 1562, which is 2 years before Shakespeare was born.
Mm.
And it became quite clear that Shakespeare frequently used source plays. In the 1830s, this historian, Samuel, the premier British historian at the time, Samuel Astley Dunham, wrote a small biography in Lives of the Eminent Literary British Men, in which he pointed out that Shakespeare used a source play for all his plays, that he was more of an adapter, not an originator. And at that point, that aggravated one other writer, Joseph Hart, who wrote an essay screaming, well, who was this original author that wrote the plays if Shakespeare wasn't? He was infuriated by this discovery by Dunham, but it wasn't really a discovery. It had been known again and again. And from there, people started searching into Shakespeare's life. It became obvious there was no connection between Shakespeare's life and the plays, and that's simply because he was adapting for the stage, so it wasn't based on his life. Knowing Italy, there's 10 plays set in Italy, and there's all sorts of arcane, obscure details about Italy. And
talk a little bit more about that, because that was actually surprising to me. You know, I didn't know a whole lot about Shakespeare's life and his biography, but I was really interested to discover sort of how little we know about Shakespeare, first of all, but also how little his biography sort of fits in with the qualifications that someone would need to write these plays. So talk a little bit about that, about what's lacking in Shakespeare's biography that could explain why someone else may have had a hand in these plays.
Right. First of all, I want to make clear, it's not snobbery. Of course, most of the great writers throughout history have had little to no education at all. Mark Twain is an obvious example. Herman Melville said, whaling ship was my Harvard and my Yale. But, Herman Melville was a whaler. So, he did experience all of what he's writing about with Moby Dick. Twain, of course, knew the Mississippi, and we can go on and on about that. The problem is not that Shakespeare didn't have an education. You can write the greatest poet, understand the human soul, and write and have insights like no one has ever had before without education, but you can't know certain details that are all throughout the canon, which clearly point to someone who's traveled to Italy, someone who studied law, and things like that. And the facts about Italy, it's not simply that there was no English source for much of this information. There isn't even a known Italian source. So they don't even know at all, whether it's St. Gregory's Well outside of Milan, or the statues of Giulio Romano, or the story of the murder of Gonzago, which he puts into Hamlet, which was an actual tale, and scholars didn't discover this until the 19th century. So he knew all these facts about Italy, and I could go on and on about the law. There's a legal dictionary about Shakespeare's law terminology. And why is he studying, law in order to use legal metaphors in his plays and things like that? So the authorship question led into this real discovery of the disconnect between them, and then all of a sudden conspiracy theories started developing.
And so who is Thomas North, for for our listeners who may not be familiar with that name, and why do you, just sort of generally speaking, give us a little introduction into why you think that Thomas North was the person who wrote all of these source plays from which it's been said that Shakespeare adapted his works.
Yeah, Thomas North is 29 years older than William Shakespeare. He's well known for translations, and particularly his translation of Plutarch's Lives, which, as scholars have long known, were used for the Roman plays. In fact, they were used scene for scene, speech for the Roman plays, and a lot of the language of Thomas North's chapters in Plutarch's Lives are just used straight in Antony, Cleopatra, Julius Caesar, and Coriolanus. And but I discovered, when trying to search for the source of Hamlet, and that's a little bit of a story, that's the only project that I'd wanted to do, is try to figure out the exact history of Hamlet. I discovered that there was an earlier Hamlet. This is not controversial, that Thomas Nash, a satirist, referred to this original Hamlet in a work in 1589, which is too early for Shakespeare to have written it. And he refers to this English Seneca having written this Hamlet. And I was putting all this information about Hamlet, and I wanted to figure out, I was very enticed by the line that Nash wrote. And I figured I could figure out who this English Seneca is. There's all sorts of databases now. There's early English books online, and which would allow you to actually search exactly what Thomas Nash means by English Seneca, and that, that was in 2005, and I North as the author of Hamlet. I started studying Thomas North, and I realized, okay, so he wrote all the plays.
And what started you on this kind of quest? Because one of the things that first intrigued me as you started talking about your own story was that you were not sort of educated as a Shakespeare scholar with a PhD from some credentialed university. And in fact, you didn't even graduate from college. I think you were a couple credits shy from your degree, and never sort of really looked at Shakespeare very much before about 15 years ago. So kind of what started you on this quest, and why did you become sort of all consumed by it, so that you've done little else for the last 15 years?
Right. Well, I was writing about a subject called biogeography, which is the intersection of evolution and geography. It's why plants and animals are where they are, and ideas spread just as species do. Plants and animals move across the world, they evolve, they change. And I wanted to show that this is exactly what happens with memes, with ideas, with religions and technologies. And I wanted to give an example of this with the most celebrated work of art in history, Hamlet. So I wanted to show how all the ideas that are in Hamlet, or most of them, all the big ideas, ended up in London. The Danish legend, how that traveled down from Denmark. It was a Viking legend, and down into France, and then was translated into French and made it over. And then there's Seneca and Plutarch and all these other philosophies that are in there, and they all ended up in London in the brain of one person. But in studying this history, you realize it didn't originally end up in the brain of Shakespeare. It ended up in this author of the Hamlet, this English Seneca.
This earlier play, yeah. And one of the fascinating parts about the way you do your research, I think what makes it really unique, is the fact that you are not just sort of analyzing these plays yourself, but you're using this computer software to do so. And so let me see, I'm going to see if I can share my screen here and show folks what this looks like. Hopefully, can people see my screen now?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, so tell people about sort of what this computer software does, and how you started, using this to look into the plays.
So once I realized that North had written the plays, I used plagiarism software. I put all of the works of North in, and all of the works in Shakespeare in, to see if he's borrowing from not just Plutarch's Lives, but from his other texts, from North's other translations, which are not really well studied at all. Few people know about them. Almost no one.
Right, they're a bit obscure.
There's that, right, and ran them through, and I just found passage after passage after passage that matches. And it's incredible. And they're always in the same context. And some of the lines that are matching are lines that had never occurred before, that no one else had used in the searchable history of the English language. So they occur nowhere else on early English books online, or in Google Books. When you look up these lines, you find only Thomas North and William Shakespeare. You find mostly William Shakespeare in one or two references to Thomas North, and that's it. So it's quite clear that the passages, the playwright is constantly remembering passages from North's translations.
Yeah, and you can see, so tell us what we're looking at here with this scene from Antony and Cleopatra, and then we can show a few others here. But
sure, so this is,
this is some of the most dramatic, I think, for me, are the ones that do relate to North's Plutarch, but then we can show some of the ones that are from other translations as well.
Right, this is the famous description, and this was not discovered by me. This was actually known even in the 19th century. But it blew the scholars away that discovered this. This is one of the most beautiful passages in Antony and Cleopatra, which is considered one of Shakespeare's more lyrical and beautiful masterpieces. And this is the description of the voyage of Cleopatra's voyage up the Cydnus. And you can see even the alliteration is borrowed, and the lines, the words in red, that's North on the left, and Shakespeare's on the right. The words in red are shared. And he's just going through, and clearly the book is open next to him, and he's just, borrowing, and all he's doing is changing it to blank verse. And what's amazing about this, what's amazing about this is when you look at the French version that North is translating, North has started to already, this is actually the first draft of a new passage. He's trying to make it more beautiful in his Plutarch. And you see this again and again with the passages that he's borrowing. He rewrites them from the French and uses his own language. He, for example, imbues this particular passage in his translation with alliteration. And then he does it again. He does it even more so in the second draft, which is in Antony and Cleopatra.
Yeah, and you can see, let's see if I can do this. Here's another, these are all from Dennis's websites for thomasnorth.com, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a flavor of this. So here's another scene from Julius Caesar, again, from North's Plutarch. Here's one from Coriolanus, which you can just see all those words in red there. But then here's Dennis's website, and I just sort of made this scrolling video, which I realized that, you at home can't read, but I just wanted to sort of show, you can just see all those words in red that are from not only North's Plutarch, but North's other translations, Dial of Princes and the Moral Philosophy of Doni, these two obscure works, and all sort of line after line. And this is what, to me as a journalist, really started becoming compelling to me, because it wasn't just sort of somebody saying that there were sort of allusions to this other writer or this other writer's life, but that actually this sort of scientific sort of approach to using this plagiarism software, and you can go and you can view this yourself on Dennis's website if you want to look at it more closely. But I just wanted to show that so that people could get a bit of a sense for what this looks like. But so I think, one of the things that constantly comes up when people talk to me about the book is they might look at evidence like that and say, okay, clearly whoever wrote Shakespeare's plays was really into Thomas North and really used a lot of his writing, but that doesn't prove that there was some earlier writer who wrote all these early plays that Shakespeare adapted. So why do you take that extra leap and say that it wasn't just Shakespeare using Thomas North's prose translations, but that it was actually Thomas North writing these plays that Shakespeare then rewrote?
Well, there's 183 reasons, but I'll make 4. Well, first of all, right. So when you see those passages and you see the borrowings, you have two choices. Either Shakespeare was obsessed with literally everything Thomas North ever wrote and could recall it again and again from his first play to his last, or he was adapting North's plays. The reason why I believe we know for a fact it's the latter. First of all, we know those early plays exist. So even if you assume that Shakespeare is obsessively following north, you still don't know, you still need someone else to have written the plays. If it's someone else who wrote the first Romeo and Juliet and someone else who wrote Hamlet, then Shakespeare is peculiarly has someone else's Hamlet on, and he's filling it with passages from North. The simpler one is that North. Two, Thomas Nash and all the other satirists of the era frequently refer to Thomas North as the author of the Shakespeare plays for the smoking guns, of which there is just no other explanation. It's not simply that Shakespeare's borrowing from Thomas North's published work, he borrows from his unpublished text, and this is crucial. So we found Thomas North's journal. My partner, June Schluter, my better half, as I call her husband, found notice of Thomas North's handwritten journal, never published till centuries later in any form. And it's used for Henry VIII. Passages in the thing are used for Henry VIII and Winter's Tale. It helps explain Winter's Tale, and there's other information in it. Again, there's the George North manuscript, which we found. And the reason we knew that there would be a manuscript source for the Shakespeare plays at North Family Libraries, because we knew where they were written. That's why we found it. It's not a coincidence that he's got all these manuscripts from the North family, including Thomas North's journal and the George North manuscript. And then again, he's able to, Thomas North doesn't publish Nepo's Lives until 1602. And in that are the speeches on grief used in Richard II, which was performed, Shakespeare had it performed, and it was published by 1597, so before Nepo's Lives. So the playwright had to have access to Thomas North's personal papers, personal translations of Nepo's Lives before he published it. So that's the third manuscript. And then fourth, we've got Thomas North's own dial and marginalia that he writes in his Dial of Princes, his old copy of his dial. And he marks passages that he then uses in the Shakespeare canon. So we've got smoking gun after smoking gun after smoking gun, confirming that the simplest explanation that Shakespeare is adapting North's plays, that North is indeed the author we've all been looking for of the source plays, which we know exist. That's the true answer.
And it's not just that, right? I mean, you have all these unpublished manuscripts that really amazing that you were able to find not one but two unpublished manuscripts, and then you also have the marginalia from North's own writing.
Thanks to you, Michael Blanding.
That I helped discover, which is another story for another time. But okay. What also what I love writing about in my book, which I focus on a lot, is the life of Thomas North too, because he just lived this amazingly colorful life. And as I open the book with that scene from the Kenilworth Festival and the Earl of Leicester and A Midsummer Night's Dream, you can kind of see how these different elements from his life may have ended up in the play. So talk a little bit about that, about the relationship between North and the Earl of Leicester, and what might have actually, how that might have actually influenced some of these plays.
Yeah. North did not just write the plays, he lived the plays, and it's really, just truly stunning. And he wrote for Earl of Leicester's Men, and we have documents now indicating that he's getting paid for a play at the same time that Earl of Leicester Men are getting paid for a play in a receipt in Roger North's book. But you see a lot of, at the time when he's writing these plays in the 1570s, he is advocating at all times Leicester's policies. So he's against the Duke of Alençon, and you see, in Henry VI,
who was a suitor for Queen Elizabeth, right?
Right. So Leicester, of course, opposes the Queen marrying someone else, and particularly the French suitor, the Duke of Alençon. And there's just this blistering, Henry VI Part 1 is an example, in which it's just this blistering attack on France, and it's instead praises Leicester's ancestors. But you see this again, play after play after play. The Midsummer Night's Dream thing, amazing, just amazing coincidences with As You Like It being Thomas North's, with Rosalind, the #1 major female character. She's the largest female role by far. It's said.
Yeah. So maybe pick one play, because I think people are your passion comes through when you talk about this stuff, and I can follow what you're saying because I wrote the book and I've talked to you over the years, but it's probably a whirlwind for folks listening. All those references. So just pick one play maybe and explain kind of how it relates to Thomas North's life and how it relates to the plays.
Okay, yeah. So Winter's Tale was something that came last, that for me in discovering, because you had to have the journal to even understand what it's about. But you learn what is now considered the Winter's Tale has always been thought of as a fairy tale filled with all sorts of impossibilities. But when you have Thomas North's journal and you realize he's what he's doing, and he's traveling to Italy to reconcile England with the Roman Catholic Church, England with Rome and the Pope, and
he's a diplomat on this delegation, right?
He's on an embassy sent by Queen Mary, and the two major characters of the journal are Emperor Charles V, who was the King of Sicily, and his brother, who was the King of Bohemia, who are the two major characters. And you realize that the whole story is an allegory on the life of Queen Mary, and it's decorated with some of the most extraordinary and poignant images from Thomas North's trip to Rome, which includes this his scene of the Giulio Romano artwork, both at Palazzo Te and the statues.
Right. So he sees this artwork, right, at these sort of lifelike statues in Italy, right? And then how does that figure into the play?
So at Santa Maria del Grazie, there are, which is decorated by Giulio Romano, there's these lifelike statues in which Thomas North writes about in his journal these tremendous works of these most wonderful works of wax he had ever seen. And at the end of and this is a Virgin Mary church with miracles of resurrection. She has saved the lives of different people who were just about to die and they come back to life. And that's the end of the Winter's Tale, in which the Queen Hermione is a statue.
She's been sort of turned into a statue for 15 years or something, right?
Yes, she's turned it. The statue's made out of her. The daughter prays in a very in a Catholic way. They make it like the Virgin Mary in many renditions. She's supposed to figure for Queen Catherine, Queen Mary's mother at the time. And she comes back to life. And that was just part of the miracle stories and Catholic miracles that were suddenly now legal in Queen Mary's England, which had not been. And they say that the statue in the play was made by Giulio Romano, that master, and people are wondering, how do they even know that Romano made statues? And the whole scene is very familiar from the journal, as well as there's another scene in the journal in which he sees a woman praying for the life of her dead-born child, and is praying again before the Virgin Mary, and believe that it's possible for her child to be resurrected. And that's what the play's about. It's Catholic miracles and resurrection, but it's also the life of Queen Mary and the life of her mother, where the father's divorcing the mother because he thinks she's been adulterous.
And so what does it matter to know that kind of background? I mean, if you're right that this play was based on this, life of Queen Mary and this trip that Thomas North took to Italy to reconcile with the Pope, how does that sort of inform or change the way that you see the play The Winter's Tale?
Right. It completely transforms it. It's a lot like Animal Farm, where everyone's reading Animal Farm, if you can imagine this, and just think it's a fairy tale, and just think it's just a story about animals and really has no deeper meaning. You find out, no, it's a Russian Revolution, and Napoleon is Stalin. Napoleon the Pig is Stalin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they go through, and you can go through scene by scene. Well, that's what happens with Winter's Tale, which everyone thinks it's just this fairy tale and it's just crazy and it's bizarre. And you find out it's just character by character maps onto the people that were most important in North's life in the 1550s, when just after he had gone, when he'd gone on the trip, et cetera, including Perdita being Queen Mary, and the divorce of the parents, which ended Catholicism for many years. And then Queen Mary comes back a number of years later and becomes queen. She's banished from the court and she comes back. She marries the Prince of Sicily, just as Perdita does, Queen Mary does in the play. And you see it's a completely rational, politically savvy historical allegory, just as Animal Farm is. In fact, it's even more detailed. The trial of Hermione is the trial of Queen Catherine, Henry VIII's wife, and it's paraphrased passage by passage, line by line. The whole story maps, and then you have the Catholic miracles at the end, which is symbolic of the Catholic miracles that were now, the Virgin Mary statues were now legal again in England under Queen Mary, and so were the stories of her miracles.
And before we open up to questions, talk a little bit more generally play, which is just so obvious, a sort of correspondence in the way that you take it apart. But on a larger scale, what does it mean to you to say that these plays were based on Thomas North's life and works? Like, why does it matter? I mean, the plays are these great works of literature. We can still read Hamlet without knowing anything about Thomas North. Yeah. It's still an amazing play, but how does it sort of change them to you? And why should we care about this, I guess, is the question.
We see, just as we saw with Winter's Tale, we can do this with every play in the canon, and especially Hamlet. You get to understand these plays in a way that you never could before, and you see that it comes straight from his life, that everything that North experienced, and that with Hamlet, he seriously thinks he's going to die. He thinks this is it, and he's writing Hamlet as a swan song. And it's the Spanish Armada is coming, and he's got a peculiarly dangerous task. But it's play after play through his suffering from the late 1580s after Leicester dies and he has no more meal tickets. So you see, that's the tragic period. And you see the events that follow, not just in Hamlet, but then in King Lear and its focus on poverty, and Macbeth and the dark plays. And you really, it opens up all new avenues. What's amazing is that these extraordinary plays are even more compelling and in some ways more beautiful than you ever thought they were.
Yeah. Well, let's open it up to questions. We can keep talking if people don't have questions, but if people do, I'd love to bring other people into the conversation. And we have a couple in the chat here, and then also we have a small enough group. If people just want to unmute themselves and just ask questions, then they're more than welcome to.
Right. Thanks, guys. And Michael, thank you. I finally got to just sit back and not be the moderator for once. Awesome.
Right. And it's fun for me to sort of be a moderator and not sort of be the one answering the questions too.
So Dennis, how did Shakespeare get access to Thomas North's unpublished works? And in comma to that question, how did you essentially map Thomas North's diary? How did you marry up these two? What's the CSI Dennis McCarthy? How did you make this happen?
So remarkably, Michael Blanding's not the first person to write a biography of Thomas North. There was a little bit of a biography written about him, a major biography, in 1592 called Groat's Earth of Wit, and it's about the entire North family. It shows how Thomas North rose to it's an allegory, but at the end of the story is got from his father, got nothing, was disinherited by his father, is a scholar, that this upstart actor, playwright, who is a jack of all trades and is later identified and nicknamed Shake Scene, and called the Upstart Crow. He says to the scholar, you know, it seems that you're a scholar, and I can and gentlemen like you get by me their entire living. And the scholar says, how do you mean to use me? He says, well, by writing plays. And so he actually met Shakespeare. The story is, at least the story in the satires, he met Shakespeare at about this time when he was broke. He needed money for the plays, so he sold him the old plays and helped him and revised them and helped him write other things. And that's how he stayed alive. And I'm sorry, there's a second question.
How did you map this? I mean, how did you when you're the Winter's Tale, for example, or how do you make those connections?
Well, when you read the journal, it became quite clear, and I had nothing on the Winter's Tale before I read the journal. It's just some obvious scenes become really, really clear in it that remind you of the Winter's Tale, like when he's seeing this woman praying before this. See, there's the.
These are some images from Dennis's My Trips Together. Here's the
Yeah.
church with the woman praying, and here's these beautiful frescoes from Julia Romano.
Right.
But continue, Dennis.
And you see, you know, a woman praying for a resurrection before a statue of a woman, and then, you know, you've got this Santa Maria del Grazie, which is decorated by, which is all about Virgin Mary miracles. That immediately makes you think of Winter's Tale. And then you look, and then you find the King of Sicily and King of Bohemia, which are brothers at the time, and how important they are to the time. And you know Queen Mary's story. The reason, in fact, it's so obvious that it's that Winter's Tale is the story of Queen Mary, that really the only reason that Shakespeare scholars, and some have even kind of mention or refer to the divorce thing, but the reason they haven't bought into it hook, line, and sinker is because why would Shakespeare be writing about Queen Mary in 1610? And of course he wasn't. He was adapting a play about Queen Mary that North had originally written in the 1550s when Mary was queen.
Well, you made it clear at the top that you don't consider Shakespeare, quote, a plagiarist, but an adapter. I mean, is that semantic splitting hairs? I mean,
I've gone back and forth on what on the exact language, but I believe it adapted. There wasn't a word for adaptation at the time. There's no such. In fact, adaptation for literary works didn't come into use until the 19th century. But it doesn't seem like Shakespeare was trying to get away with anything. 4 of his first 5 plays, most of the plays were first published anonymously. Then 4 of the first 5 plays were published as corrected or augmented by Shakespeare, not written, corrected and augmented by Shakespeare, which is true and which is really, which is more accurate. And Shakespeare didn't even publish most of the plays. And they were then attributed to him after he died. But they're adaptations. They are adaptations.
Okay, Kevin.
And that's really not controversial. Most of them, many of the plays are adaptations. Is not controversial.
Okay. And to that point, Kevin Doyle said, I've long accepted that Shakespeare borrowed liberally from other playwrights and scholars, but I wonder if your research allows for other sources in addition to Lord North, like Marlowe, for example.
Well, yes, kind of. Typically, what you find in most of the borrowings, well, first of all, North wrote on legends and histories, but he took a basic plot outline, whether it's histories or legends, whatever it is, and then he filled it in with his own speeches and a lot of plot elements, and he would alter it so it fits his own life or the political views or the political needs of the Earl of Leicester. So those foreign sources and those tales are in the plays, and they've been recognized in source study. But a lot of the writers that they think that Shakespeare was borrowing from in the 1580s and early 1590s, like Marlowe, like Sidney, like Spenser, it's the other way around. They're actually borrowing from Shakespeare, from Thomas North's plays, which is why you see a lot of parallels in Marlowe's plays too. For example, the Roman plays. But of course, the Roman plays come from Thomas North, and they were written before Marlowe started writing plays.
Thank you.
Might Shakespeare have acted in some of North's plays during his quote unquote lost years?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Yes, that's a very good possibility. And the question of whether he was with Queen's men or Leicester's men. So the Leicester's men is the troop that North wrote for. William Kemp and Richard Burbage started for it, though he moved on. But William Kemp, one of the sharers, one of Shakespeare's clown for Shakespeare in the beginning, was Leicester's major clown and was part of the Leicester's men. And so that's an easy connection. It's very possible that Shakespeare started with Leicester's men, but he was a hard worker and an entrepreneur, and he managed to get control of a company and was constantly producing, and he was already making money by 1592. He's only 28 at the time, and he's already kind of powerful and envied by other people at the time. Within a few years, he buys a new place.
Did his famous play Romeo and Juliet come from North's writing also?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. North wrote it. In fact, he wrote a first version all in rhyme, not long after he came back from Italy, from his first trip to Italy, with Montague, with the Viscount Montague.
Right. This is one of these great connections, is that on this delegation he took to Italy that he wrote the journal on, he was actually in the service of a lord named Viscount Montague. And right. They actually traveled very close to Verona on the way, and some of the scenes that he may have seen may have ended up in the play.
Right. Romeo's actual last name is Montecchi, but he changed it to Montague for, and in fact, at the marriage of his children, two of his children, Viscount Montague, they refer to the Romeo and Juliet story and the Montague story. So it's necessarily because of him, the connection is made. And he traveled and he went through Villafranca, Freetown, which is in the, and there's all sorts of other connections at the time, and from Dial of Princes as well, Thomas North's translation at the time.
By the way, Michael, I was really glad that you showed that the poster that you did of Caesar and Cleopatra, because sometimes I tend to forget that it wasn't Elizabeth Taylor and Rex Harrison and Richard Burton. They weren't actually Cleopatra.
They weren't the original actors.
No.
Right.
Dennis, what was the most? I guess you found lots. I mean, I could tell the passion's dripping through, and I was glad Michael kind of reeled you in, because I was lost.
Sorry.
What to you is the most? I don't know. Damning evidence is the right thing, but the most compelling evidence that this is.
I always thought it was the journal, Thomas North's journal, because not only is the Thomas North journal, and you have passages that are clearly used for Henry VIII, and why would Shakespeare want to, how could he get a hold of it, and why would he be trying to recreate Thomas North's life from 50 years earlier? But I think the Dial of Princes, very passages, and he does it particularly for two plays he's revising in 1591 and 2, which are Taming of the Shrew and Arden of Faversham, which is about Arden of Faversham, which is a murder story about in which the murderer is Thomas North's half sister, and who kills her brother-in-law with after she falls in love with the North family servant.
And that play, just to break in, is it's a play called Arden of Faversham. And it's actually been recognized recently as perhaps Shakespeare's first play. And in fact, the Oxford Shakespeare now refers to it as by Shakespeare and Anonymous. And it just so happens, as Dennis says, that so it's about this murder committed by this woman, Alice Arden, who kills her husband. And it's been recognized actually as a source for Macbeth, and actually maybe, you know, some of the imagery from Macbeth comes from this murder in this play. And Alice Arden was actually Thomas North's half sister, and he would have known all the characters in the play. So just to break that in, and then there's also all this language that Dennis found in
Right. There's passages. The subtitle, for example, he writes out the subtitle in the margin of it. It's the subtitle of a chapter. The subtitle of Arden of Faversham is the subtitle of a chapter in North's Dial of Princes, which North underlines and writes out in the margin. And there's passages that he's marks and then uses in Arden of Faversham. So it's about his sister, and it's, you know, and it's his passage that he's marking in his own Dial of Princes.
Do Shakespearean scholars accept this, or are they fighting back?
They're not fighting back hard yet. I think they're going to. You've got scholars that have been working, and academics that have been working for decades, you know, writing books and teaching classes and writing papers and essays for decades. They've got dozens of books. So they're not going to say, oh yeah, everything I've written is obsolete and this jackass over here is right.
Without a college degree.
Yeah, right. And an American to boot.
An American.
But so they're going to, it's impossible. It's very difficult to be open-minded to such an extent that you can literally just change your viewpoint at, say, 65. And these are how old all the top scholars are. Change your viewpoint. But hopefully they will start taking certain parts of it seriously, because they can't take it wholesale. But they got to start accepting. There's no way you can accept that Winter's Tale is about the life of Queen Mary. And I think they'll accept that certain plays, okay, they were written. I've already published, for example, with June Schluter, and that was published in Shakespeare Survey. And and the reviewers there and the editor loved it, and they're top Shakespeare scholars. So they can accept one or two or three or four plays written by Thomas North that Shakespeare adapted. It's just when you get more and more, what happens is, you start realizing it's North who is a genius.
And this is what was really fascinating to me in writing the book. I really wanted to not only write about Dennis's story and not only write about Thomas North's story, but also write about kind of how ideas are formed and how minds are changed. And Dennis is exactly right. When I published that story in the New York Times, scholars were really excited by it. One of them called it a once in a generation find, or maybe several generations find, was the quote. That was the director of the Folger Shakespeare Library said that. So when Dennis just kind of puts a piece of it out there, there's a lot of excitement about it. But it's only when he kind of reveals his whole theory that people start, really pushing back. And one of the really wonderful things about Dennis's story is this relationship with June Schluter, who you can see Dennis's passion, you can see his excitement about these ideas, and June, by contrast, is a very sober-minded, traditional Shakespearean scholar who he approached many years ago about his ideas. And unlike some of these other scholars, she didn't turn him away. She really listened to him, and they have had this sort of odd couple, unlikely collaboration over the past decade or so. That's really sort of at the heart of my book in many ways, and she emerges as this really warm-hearted, wonderful character in my book as well. And I think Dennis owes a lot of the success that he's had to her and her belief in him.
Yeah, there aren't many June Schluters in this world.
What becomes of North?
We don't know.
Well, you'll have to read the book now.
Read the book. And by the way, if you do get the book, make sure you read that last chapter. It is a killer. It is wonderful. He kind of falls off the face of the earth, 1603, 1604, right after he writes The Tempest, according to me. And we don't know when he died or where. And believe me, we've looked.
So you've rattled off all these different plays. We've long since passed 1, 2, 3, or 4. Are we talking
It's the
whole body of work is
the whole body of work,
yeah.
except for, you know, Merry Wives of Windsor is a Shakespeare at least created and directed plot story. And North may have helped write or might have been writing. William Shakespeare also wrote, he didn't just borrow from Thomas North. He didn't just have Thomas North writing for him. He had a bunch of scholars writing for him, as Philip Henslowe did at the Rose, and he was a theater impresario as well. And so Shakespeare's name is not just on plays that we think he wrote today. There's also, it's on Thomas Lord Cromwell and Yorkshire Tragedy, and Sir John Oldcastle, plays like that, which we don't think he wrote simply because these were not originally written by Thomas North, but he also was adapting works from other writers, and he would get credit for it. It became a bit of a product that, a little like Walt Disney, which is Tom Ditto. It's a great metaphor. A little like Walt Disney. So he was so famous and so and such a big producer of plays that his name on it would sell. So,
if people aren't following this, there's this whole group of plays that still exist today that are called the Shakespeare Apocrypha, that have William Shakespeare's name on the cover. But scholars don't believe that Shakespeare wrote them. They believe there was some kind of conspiracy, that some, you know, unscrupulous printer put Shakespeare's name on it to sell more copies, et cetera, et cetera. And Dennis's belief, which, you know, he's the one now saying that there's no conspiracy theory. He's saying, no, Shakespeare wrote those plays. He produced those plays. They just weren't by Thomas North. So that's why they're not as good as these other plays in the canon. So it's this funny sort of reversal where Dennis is actually the one saying there's no actual conspiracy theory.
Right. That's exactly right. Right.
I think the Thomas North family owes Dennis. Gonna put Dennis in the will here. So, thank you guys very much for taking the time. This has been, you know, I'm gonna be like Meg. We're gonna talk tomorrow and say, I don't know. Do you believe him? I don't know.
Well, it took me a while too. I didn't come along right from the very beginning. It took me a while for me to believe the whole thing myself. But you know, I know we've thrown a lot out there, but take a look at the book and also take a look at Dennis's website where he lays out a lot of this theory. And you know, at the end of the book, I don't make up my mind one way or the other. I really try to put myself in a reader's shoes, and I don't say definitively Dennis was right, but as he says in that last chapter, I lay out all the evidence for the reader to decide. So I think there's something there at least.
Well, I can tell from Dennis's passion that Dennis believes he's right.
Oh yes,
I think so.
All right. Thank you very much, you guys. I greatly appreciate it. This has been really fun watching the two of you. I just got to sit back. I've got to think of like a busman's holiday tonight. I'm good. So thank you for doing this. Good luck with this book. Thank you everybody for watching, and try to enjoy a non-rainy night in New England for once. And good luck with the book. Michael, hope to see you in person soon. And Dennis, feel free to come down to the Cape one of these days.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.